Hey guys, it's Natalie, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a September wrap-up video, and this month I read 13 books, so I have quite a few to get through. I'm just going to be giving you guys the basic gist of what I thought of the book, give you guys the rating, and if you want to see my full detailed reviews, click the link to the Goodreads in my description and you can see all of my reviews written out in one place in full detail. So like I said, I have 13 books to get through, so we're just going to hop right into it. This month in September, I made it my goal to reread a handful of classics that I read a long time ago and that I don't remember too much about. So the first classic I decided to reread is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And I feel like this is required reading for a lot of schools in the United States, and it was required reading for me in middle school, and I didn't really remember too much about it, so I decided to reread it. My boyfriend had a copy of it, so I was like, why not? And I actually really enjoyed this. If you aren't familiar with To Kill a Mockingbird, it takes place in 1930s in a town called Macomb in Alabama, and it follows the story of a young girl named Scout, her brother Jem, her father, who is a lawyer named Atticus, and sometimes their cousin Dill. And it takes place over a couple of summers, and it kind of follows Scout's life growing up in Alabama, and also a court case that her dad is taking on that changes her life. Like I mentioned before, To Kill a Mockingbird takes place in the 1930s and it was published in 1960, but despite that, it deals with a lot of topics like squashing prejudice, racism, respecting other people, and things like that. So I feel like it's very progressive for its time, especially when it was published in a time where Jim Crow laws existed and segregation and things like that. So I feel like this book is way ahead of its time in that aspect, and it's very respectable as a classic. Despite the main character Scout being a child in the 1930s, she's still very relatable as a character, and her childhood reminds me a lot of mine, of hanging out with your cousin in the summer and, you know, hanging out in the yard while your parents make dinner, and, you know, there being a mysterious man who lives in a mysterious house, just like a neighborhood myth and things like that. So despite her being a child, like I said, she is very relatable as a character, and you feel really like you're in this little town in Alabama, and so it's very atmospheric and that it feels just like a cozy little town. Overall, this is a really cute coming-of-age story that I really enjoyed, and I'm really happy that I got around to rereading it, especially as an adult rather than a 12-year-old girl in middle school. So yeah, I highly recommend you read To Kill a Mockingbird if you haven't already, or if you read it a really long time ago, give it a reread and see what you think. I gave it a 4 out of 5 because I really enjoyed it, but I didn't give it 5 out of 5 because it was a little bit slow to start, and some of the dialogue was a little bit extended, like very back and forth, and it felt a little bit tedious to read. But other than that, I really enjoyed To Kill a Mockingbird, and I definitely think it should be considered a classic, and I think that everyone should read this. The next book I read in September is a children's classic, and it's A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. And I actually did not enjoy this book at all, and it was my first 1-star book of 2019, so that was really disappointing. I'm actually going to film an entire rant review for this book because I did not like it that much. I literally loathe this book, but basically the main character is unbearable, the plot is really messy, there's every fantasy trope that you can think of just slammed into this book. There's a mild Christian agenda tangled into this book, which I did not expect, and I just really did not like this book at all. So I'm gonna save my breath for when I do the rant review video, but basically this book got a 1 out of 5. I definitely do not recommend it. So the next book I read in September is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak, and this takes place in 1930s, 1940s Germany during World War II, and it follows the story of a young girl named Liselle who gets sent to a foster family after her brother passes away and her mother becomes very ill, and it kind of follows her story from there. And while at her brother's graveside, Liselle finds a book, and she becomes obsessed with books and learning how to read and things like that, which is very difficult because during World War II a lot of books were burned in kind of a ceremonial way. I actually loved this book, and I feel like so many people have recommended me this book. So many people love this book, and I just never got around to reading it, so I'm so happy that I finally did, because this is such a beautifully written book that doesn't sugarcoat anything, and it's just a beautiful story. And it actually foreshadows a lot of the things that are going to happen, but regardless of all the foreshadowing, you feel everything in this book. Like, you feel all of the things. You feel the happiness, you feel the sadness. I honestly cried at the end of this book, even though I already knew what was going to happen. I just wept like a baby. So I gave this book a 5 out of 5 because, like I said, it is so beautifully written and it has a really unique narrator, and I just love this book so much. It's definitely my new favorite. So the pacing of this book was absolutely perfect, and that's one thing I love in a novel, is good pacing, to where it's not too fast to where like you don't know what's going on, but not too slow to where it feels like a drag. So I just really enjoyed this book. All the characters are super lovable. You feel like you're in their little town in Germany, and this is such a heartfelt story that I think everybody needs to read, and I feel like this can quickly become a modern classic and that it deserves to. So yeah, that's The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. I gave it a 5 out of 5, and I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. It is definitely my new favorite of all time. So the next book I read this month is also a classic, and it's The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, and I read this book in middle school or 9th grade, I believe, and I didn't really remember too much about it. I knew some of the characters' names and I knew the basic plot of it, but it basically is about a gang called the Greasers, and they all have greased back hair and leather jackets and switchblades and yada yada yada. It's told through a boy named Ponyboy's point of view, and there's a rival gang called the Socias, and they're popular and have lots of money and can get away with pretty much anything. So it's kind of about Ponyboy's life living as an outcast and going head to head with this other gang, and then something really bad happens, and I can't say because it will obviously spoil the book. The pacing of the book was way too fast. The characters were 2D and very flat, and I just could not connect with them in any way. And all of them also had a really fragile, like, male ego, and they wouldn't talk about their feelings because they were so macho, and that kind of bothered me. So I don't know, I just did not enjoy this book, and I feel like I'm not sure what I'm supposed to learn from this book. All I got from this book was society sucks. Like, so unfortunately, this is one of the classics that I didn't love. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, and I wouldn't say I recommend this. The next book I read this month is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. It's another classic. Are we surprised? So I did not like this book at all, and I actually hated it. I uploaded a rant review to my channel, so if you want to see the full review of me talking about why I hate this book, I'll link it in the description down below. But I'm not going to get too into it. It's basically about a boy named Holden who flunks out of yet another prep school. So out of boredom and to avoid telling his parents, he flees to New York City for 3 days and just does a bunch of random stuff. That's the entire plot of the book. I hated the main character. He was a narcissist, he was misogynistic, he had no redeeming qualities, and there's no plot to this book. So I gave it 1 out of 5 stars. It's my second 1-star book in this month and of the year, so I was heavily disappointed by this. I don't know how I read this in high school and enjoyed it, or did I enjoy it? I can't remember because there's nothing to remember about this book. So like I said, whole rant review already up on my channel. I'm not going to get into it. I'll link in the description down below. Catcher in the Rye, 1 out of 5 stars. So after I read Catcher in the Rye, I honestly got really sick of reading classics, so I decided to take a break and I read A Map of Days by Ransom Briggs, and this is the 4th novel in the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children series, and I love this series so much. It's my favorite series of all time by far. Everything about the series is perfect. The pacing, the plot, the characters, everything. I just love this series with all my love and all my life. I just love the series. I love it, and I really recommend you read it if you haven't already. So I can't tell you what Map of Days is about because that will spoil it. This is the 4th book in this series, like I mentioned before. So I'm just going to tell you the general synopsis of the series itself. So it's about a boy named Jacob, and he witnesses his grandfather's mysterious death, and he kind of falls down a rabbit hole into his grandfather's history, and he unveils a lot of secrets, and he comes upon an island full of peculiar children with peculiar abilities, and they just go on adventures from there. And I just love this series so much. Everything about it is so good and so great, and I love it so much. So I gave this book a 4 out of 5 because I feel like I would have been fine with the series ending as a trilogy, but I'm really happy that they're continuing it and making it into a 6-book series. I really enjoyed this book because it has a lot of character development, and you see the more political side of what it means to be a peculiar and like their separate kind of faction of government and things like that. So I just found this book really interesting. I like the new arc that it's taking. So yeah, I really love the series. Highly recommend it. 4 out of 5. This was probably one of my favorite reads of this month, so yeah. So the next book I read in September is another classic, and it's The Giver by Lois Lowry. I can never say it properly. But this is a short YA dystopian novel about a boy named Jonas, and everything in the society that Jonas lives in is pre-assigned. Everything is laid out for you. You just kind of do what they tell you to do. And his new lifetime career is being given memories of what life used to be like before his dystopian society, and he kind of just wants more. I feel like this is good for any age level. I feel like you don't need to be a child to, you know, enjoy this. I feel like I'll definitely read this again in the future. It's a really short, easy read, and it's a really good story with good morality, and I really like that about it. So I gave The Giver a 4 out of 5 rather than a 5 out of 5 because I really wanted more from it. I really wanted a longer story. I wanted more world building, and I wanted more exploration into like this dystopian society, because I feel like world building is really important in dystopian novels regardless of if it's a middle grade book or not. So I don't know, I feel like this one deserves to be a classic because it has a lot of good themes and a really interesting story, and it has an open ending, and like I said, good for any age level. So I definitely recommend The Giver, or if you've read it already, a reread, because I don't know, the book's really good and I'm definitely going to reread it again myself. So the next book I read in September is Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon, and if you guys remember my last wrap-up video called What I Read This Summer, I read The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon, and I did not enjoy that book. However, I decided to give Nicola Yoon another chance because her work is very loved and very popular. I read this book in 2017, but I didn't really remember too much about it, so I decided to read it again, and now that I reread it, I can kind of see why I didn't remember anything from it. So Everything Everything is a story about a girl named Madeline who lives in her house permanently because she is allergic to everything in the outside world. So she lives constantly in her air-filtered house where no one's allowed to visit her, and she just lives inside with her mom, and she occasionally sees her nurse. So basically, when a boy named Ollie moves in next door, they become infatuated with each other, they fall in love, and Madeline suddenly has the urge to see the world and step outside regardless of if it means she might die. So before I talk about the things I don't like, I'm going to talk about the things I do like. One thing that I love about Nicola Yoon's work is that she includes a lot of themes of POC identity, and she always has great representation in her books, and I love that. And her stories are always super lighthearted, and they're supposed to make you feel fuzzy and warm, and I appreciate that about her work. So overall, I gave Everything Everything a 3 out of 5. I liked it better than The Sun Is Also a Star, but not by much. I gave this a 3-star rating, and I gave The Sun Is Also a Star a 2-star rating, so it's not that much higher. I really like the plot of this book, and I like the plots of all her books, and I like the covers and everything like that, and I like the representation, but I don't really like the way that it's written, and I just find that her work is very fast-paced, so it's really hard to connect with the characters, and it's also really cheesy to where the romance doesn't feel like romance. It just feels like teenage lust with like a few nice words thrown in there. So I don't know, 3 out of 5. I'm not sure if I'll try Nicola Yoon again. I'll keep you guys posted on that. So the next book I read is A List of Cages by Robin Rowe, and this is told through two perspectives, Adam and Julian, who are foster brothers who get separated after Julian moves in with his uncle. And Julian became foster brothers with Adam when Julian's parents died, so he stayed with Adam and his family, but then his uncle comes into the picture, and now he lives with his uncle in the book. Julian is very reclusive and very quiet, and he constantly is mourning the death of his parents. And Adam is very outgoing, he's very sociable, popular in school, and so they're very different. And this follows the story of Adam and Julian kind of reconnecting, and Adam finds out a secret about what's going on with Julian and why he is the way he is. And this story was absolutely beautiful and I loved it. I honestly didn't know what to expect. I picked this up at the thrift store not knowing anything about it, and I absolutely loved it. So I really love A List of Cages because it deals with a lot of difficult topics and it does it in the correct way, and the writing is done so well and the pacing is done so well, and I just overall love this book. It's very emotional and very raw, and I honestly cried when I read this book, so I gave this book a 5-star rating. I honestly can't think of anything I didn't like about it. I really enjoyed this, and I feel like this is a hard-hitting contemporary that everyone needs to read. So yeah, I highly recommend A List of Cages by Robin Rowe. It's my favorite book of the month besides The Book Thief, so I highly recommend this. So the next book I read in September is Before I Fall by Lauren Oliver, and I feel like a lot of teenage girls from my generation have read this book or seen the movie or both, because I remember this being incredibly talked about in my teenage years. So I finally got around to reading it, and I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it either. Before I Fall is about a girl named Samantha Kingston, and it's kind of like the Valentine's Day celebration at school, and she goes to a party and then gets into a car accident and she dies. Only she doesn't die because she keeps reliving the same day over and over again. I think it was 7 times she relived the same day, and she has to try to figure out what she's not doing right and what she did wrong and just things like that. This book was kind of like Mean Girls meets Groundhog Day. I do like the writing. I love the character Kent. He's kind of one of the love interests, and I love him so much. He's so pure. He's my spirit animal. I love him. We stan Kent. This book also has a lot of character development, and it has positive themes about kindness and enjoying your life and just treating others better in general. I did not like Sam's best friend, Lindsay. She was a very toxic friend, and Sam constantly made excuses for her behavior. I used to have a toxic friend much like Lindsay, and it just kind of hurts me to read about it and to see that the main character kind of just dismisses her behavior for the entire book. I feel like the popularity thing in the book was laid on so thick that it's so cheesy, and it read like Mean Girls, like just the over-exaggerated popularity stereotype, and it just really did not click with me. I don't really like YA books that have a ton of references because I feel like a good YA book is so well written that it lasts through several generations and it can be relatable to any generation without the use of references, and that's just my personal opinion. I don't mind references, like I said, but I just felt like there was a superfluous amount of them in this book. The last thing I didn't like is the ending, and it just didn't really make any sense to me, and I was just kind of left dumbfounded, and I wasn't like satisfied in any way, so I don't know, maybe I should give the movie a try. So overall, I gave Before I Fall a 3 out of 5. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. It's an okay story, but it's not something I'm probably ever going to read again, and not something that I'm going to ultimately take away from. So yeah. So the next book I read is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and this one really surprised me actually. I went into this not knowing anything about it, and I just knew that Emily Bronte was a sister of Charlotte Bronte, who wrote Jane Eyre, and I really enjoyed Jane Eyre, and I actually loved this book. So when I first started reading this, I actually DNF'd at page 100, but a few days later, something just drew me back to the book, and so I just continued reading, and I didn't stop until I got to the end, and I actually loved it. So the story is basically centered around Kathy and Heathcliff, and they are absolutely obsessed with each other. Kathy kind of sees Heathcliff more as like a pet and someone she can own, and then Heathcliff is just kind of obsessed with her to the point where Kathy's like his drug of choice, and they're so disgustingly obsessed with each other that they do rash things and they act irrationally, and it's just like a monstrous story of obsession, honestly, and I loved it. So if you're a fan of gothic period pieces that are fictional, obviously, and something that you can really like immerse yourself into and get engrossed in, I highly recommend Wuthering Heights. And she's definitely not the same as Charlotte Bronte in terms of writing style and her themes, but I still really enjoyed this book. I actually gave it a 5 out of 5. I really enjoyed it, and this one really surprised me, and I really didn't think I was gonna love it as much as I did, but I highly recommend this one. It's really hard to talk about this book and have it make sense because it is just like a twisted tale of passion and revenge and obsession, and I can't really say much about it, but I don't know, just read it, I guess. I don't know. I know I didn't really describe this book too well, but it's multi-generational. It's told through the perspective of a servant who was around Kathy and Heathcliff, and kind of Kathy and Heathcliff's relationship kind of spread like an infection to the later generations of their family, and it just got really twisted, and there's like a lot of trigger warnings in here, might I add, but really enjoyed this book. 5 out of 5, definitely give it a go. So the next book I read this September is The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. And if you didn't know, if you're one of the few people who have never heard of The Sun and Her Flowers, this is probably one of the most hyped books ever next to Milk and Honey. But it's a collection of poetry and thoughts and illustrations. And I didn't love this book, but I didn't hate it either. I gave it a 3-star rating because it wasn't like mind-blowingly explosive or anything like that. Like, it didn't really like move me. It was kind of just like thoughts or like things I've heard before but like worded differently. I do like that this book deals with a lot of untouched topics like POC identity and feminism and immigration and things like that. I really appreciate that, but I didn't feel like this was 100% necessary as a book because, like I said, I feel like I've heard a lot of these things before, but it was just worded differently. This is kind of like a collection of Tumblr posts, so I feel like this would be really good to give as a gift to a teenager who is going through things for the first time, like heartbreak and love and feeling lost or something like that, and I feel like that would be good for, you know, a teenager. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it. 3 out of 5. I don't think it's necessarily worth the hype, but I think that it's a pretty book. It's got nice illustrations, and I really like the topics that Rupi Kaur touched on, and I would love to read something longer from her, like a memoir or something like that. But yeah, I mean, give it a try. It's not for me, but it doesn't mean it's not for anybody, so give it a try. Okay, so we are finally on the last book of the September wrap-up, and it is Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli, and this is a middle grade book. It's only about 180 or so pages, and I picked this up at the thrift store because I saw that Books and Lala had read it, and she rated it really highly, and I trust her opinion, and she said it's one of those middle grade books that really holds up over time, so I wanted to check it out. I actually loved Jerry Spinelli when I was growing up, and I read almost all his books, like Eggs, Maniac McGee, Ringer. I read all of them. I just love Jerry Spinelli. So the story is through a perspective of a boy named Leo, and his school is very conforming, and everyone kind of does the same thing and wears the same thing and has premeditated friend groups and everything like that. And one day a girl named Stargirl shows up, and Stargirl is not like anybody else. She wears things that nobody else wears, she does things that nobody else does, and she kind of just shakes up the school and falls in love with Leo, and Leo falls in love with her, and it's a really cute story. This story has really great themes about kindness and friendship and nonconformity and things like that, and I just really loved this book. I really enjoyed Stargirl as a character, and the story overall was really cute. It's a really short read, only 180 or so pages. Like I said, I also really like that it takes place in the desert. I feel like I don't read a lot of books that take place in the desert. I gave Stargirl a 4 out of 5 rating. I would have given it 5 out of 5, but some of the dialogue was really weird even for me, and I just thought it was kind of strange. So other than that, I really enjoyed the book, and it gets a 4 out of 5. Definitely one of the best middle grade books I've ever read, so if you're looking for something short and sweet and has positive messages, I highly recommend you check out Stargirl. So that concludes my September wrap-up video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I can't believe I managed to read 13 books this month. I think I just had so much time on my hands and I just tore through them. So I really enjoyed making this video, and I'm so happy to be doing content that I actually enjoy. So leave a like, subscribe down below, and hit the notification bell, and let me know some books that you've read in September that you really enjoyed.